What if the very king who united two ancient kingdoms also planted the seeds of revolution that would tear them apart? James I of England stands as one of history's most paradoxical monarchs, a man who inherited unprecedented power, yet whose beliefs would ultimately provoke a catastrophic civil war. His story begins not in the palaces of London, but in the blood-soaked drama of 16th-century Scotland, where a baby born to intrigue and murder would one day wear two crowns. Born in June of 1566 at Edinburgh Castle, James entered a world of chaos. His mother, Mary Queen of Scots, was one of the most controversial figures of her age, beautiful, Catholic, and caught in a web of political conspiracies. His father, Lord Darnley, would be dead within months, murdered in a mysterious explosion that rocked Scotland. Before James could even walk, his mother was forced to abdicate, imprisoned by her own nobles. The infant prince found himself King of Scotland at just 13 months old, a pawn in the ruthless games of Reformation politics. The young king's childhood was far from the fairy tale one might imagine. Raised by stern Protestant tutors who beat classical education and Calvinist theology into him, James grew up brilliant but deeply insecure. His regent, the Earl of Moray, was assassinated when James was just 3. Throughout his youth, he watched as rival factions kidnapped him, used him as a puppet, and treated the crown as a prize to be seized. Yet through it all, James developed a sharp intellect and an unshakable belief in one dangerous idea: the divine right of kings, that monarchs answered only to God, never to their subjects. As James matured and took control of Scotland, he proved surprisingly capable. He navigated the treacherous waters between Catholic and Protestant factions, maintained a fragile peace, and even earned respect as a scholar. He wrote treatises on witchcraft, poetry, and the nature of kingship itself. In 1589, he married Anne of Denmark in a ceremony that would produce 8 children, though only 3 survived to adulthood. But James's eyes were always turned southward, toward the richer, more powerful throne of England, where the aging Queen Elizabeth ruled without an heir. The moment finally came in 1603. Queen Elizabeth died childless, and James Stuart became James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England for the first time in history. He rode south to London in triumph, greeted by cheering crowds who hoped this learned, peaceful king would bring stability after decades of religious turmoil. James called himself King of Great Britain, dreaming of full political union. He commissioned the most influential English translation of the Bible ever made, the King James Version, which would shape Christianity for centuries. Everything seemed possible. But beneath the pageantry, tensions simmered. English parliamentarians expected their new king to understand English traditions of shared governance. James, however, arrived with very different ideas. He believed Parliament existed only to rubber stamp his decisions, not to question them. In his speeches, he declared that kings were like gods on earth, accountable to no mortal authority. When Parliament dared to debate his spending or question his foreign policy, James grew furious, dissolving sessions and ruling without them for years at a time. Could any kingdom thrive when its ruler refused to listen? James's spending habits became legendary, and not in a good way. He showered his favorite courtiers with titles, lands, and money while England's treasury drained. His court became notorious for excess and scandal, particularly surrounding the Duke of Buckingham, whose meteoric rise fueled whispers of impropriety. Meanwhile, ordinary English people groaned under new taxes imposed without parliamentary consent. The king who wrote books about wise governance seemed unable to practice it. How long could this continue before something broke? Religious tensions added fuel to the fire. James faced pressure from all sides: Catholics who hoped for tolerance, Puritans who demanded further reform of the Church of England, and Anglicans who wanted to maintain the status quo. In 1605, Catholic conspirators nearly succeeded in blowing up the king and Parliament in the infamous Gunpowder Plot. James survived, but the incident hardened his attitudes and increased persecution of Catholics. His attempts to marry his son to a Spanish Catholic princess sparked outrage among Protestant English subjects. Every religious decision alienated someone. James's foreign policy proved equally controversial. He dreamed of being a peacemaker, negotiating treaties rather than waging wars. While this saved money and lives, many English subjects saw it as weakness, especially when he refused to intervene in the 30 Years' War despite Protestant forces suffering devastating defeats on the continent. His son-in-law, Frederick V, lost his kingdom in Bohemia, and Parliament begged James to send military aid. The king refused, insisting on his prerogative to control foreign affairs. The rift between crown and parliament deepened into a chasm. Despite his many flaws, James possessed genuine intellectual gifts. He engaged in theological debates, patronized playwrights including William Shakespeare, and wrote books that were read across Europe. His court became a center of learning and culture, even if it was also a center of corruption. He genuinely believed that his vision of absolute monarchy would bring order and stability to his kingdoms. But belief is not the same as wisdom, and James could not see, or refused to see, how his actions were building a powder keg. By the time James's health began to fail in the 1620s, the damage was done. He had established precedents that his son Charles would follow to catastrophic ends. James died in March of 1625 at the age of 58, his dream of absolute monarchy intact but his kingdoms profoundly divided. He never understood that in trying to be a god to his people, he had forgotten to be their servant. The question he left behind was simple but terrible. Can a nation survive when its ruler believes himself above the law? James I's legacy is complex and contradictory. He gave the English-speaking world its most enduring Bible translation, united two ancient crowns, and maintained relative peace during his reign. Yet his stubborn insistence on divine right, his contempt for Parliament, and his fiscal irresponsibility created the conditions for the English Civil War that would erupt under his son. Charles I would be executed for crimes James had pioneered, and the monarchy itself would be abolished, temporarily, because of ideas James championed. In trying to make the crown unquestionable, James made it unbearable. Today, historians debate whether James was a brilliant scholar trapped in an impossible political situation or an arrogant fool who squandered his advantages. What's undeniable is that his reign marked a turning point in British history, when the old medieval certainties about kingship collided with new ideas about representation and rights. The conflicts he sparked would not be resolved until the Glorious Revolution of 1688 established parliamentary supremacy. In that sense, James I was the last medieval king and the first modern failure, a man whose vision of the past tried to control a future that would not be controlled. His story reminds us that power without accountability corrupts, that tradition without adaptation dies, and that even the most learned minds can be blinded by their own certainties. James I wore two crowns but could not see that neither throne was truly his, both belonged to the people he claimed to rule. And when those people finally demanded their voice be heard, the foundations James built came crashing down, changing the course of history forever. The king who united kingdoms ended up dividing them in ways he never imagined, proving that how we use power matters far more than how much power we possess. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. See you in the next one.